Hello and welcome to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. My name is Lori Lumby and I am the pastor and spiritual director of this online community. Let me pause for a moment to read to you from our mission statement. We are a community of men and women who consider Jesus to be our teacher, while honoring the spiritual truths inherent within all sacred traditions. We recognize the divine as that which is at once outside of us, within us, and present within all of creation, and which can be acknowledged by any name, image, or presence. We believe in the inherent potential of all human beings to become self-actualized and acknowledge the spiritual journey as a formative tool in this endeavor. We believe in the law of love and seek to know more fully the love of the divine that dwells within us and which seeks to be known in the world through us in service to the betterment of our world. Let us pause for a moment in silence as we prepare ourselves in our heart and our mind to receive God's nourishment for us today. As I post this service for this coming week, I'm aware that in this country, in the United States, we are celebrating Independence Day. I'm also aware that our brothers and sisters in Canada have just recently celebrated Canada Day. This is a time that we celebrate and give honor to the freedom, specifically the liberties that we experience as a free country. We are grateful for the freedoms and the liberties that we have as Americans, and we are grateful for the government and the courts and the other systems that help to ensure that freedom. Today, however, I am not going to speak about that kind of freedom. But instead, I'm going to speak to something that is of even greater importance for us as human beings. And that is a term that I call authentic freedom. Authentic freedom, unlike the liberties that we experience in our country, is completely independent of the external circumstances of our lives. Authentic freedom is known by an indwelling experience of peace, of contentment, of love, of joy, of expansiveness, of buoyancy, and of fulfillment. Authentic freedom is something that we can only experience within ourselves and is completely independent of the external circumstances of our lives. As such, we could be living under oppression, we could be living in imprisonment, we could be suffering from illness, we could be in a concentration camp, we could be experiencing the worst possible things of the human condition and still no freedom. It is this kind of freedom that Paul speaks about in his letter to the Romans that we read for this coming Sunday. In his reading, he draws a parallel between flesh and spirit. And in doing so, he reminds me of a common phrase that I hear tossed around a lot these days, which is that the idea that we are spiritual beings here having a human experience. I believe that this is what Paul was trying to get across in his letter to the Romans. That we are human, and that as human beings, we are living in these flesh suits. And as such, as human beings, we are limited by our physical being. And in agreeing to experiment with the human condition, in agreeing to participating in the human condition, we also agreed to fear. Fear is the natural consequence of our perceived separation from Source, that Source that I call God. What Paul was trying to communicate to the Romans was that while we may be limited by the fears and false perceptions of the human condition, while we may be limited by our physical form, that we are not limited, that we are without limit through the gift of God's Spirit. That Spirit that lives and dwells within us. That Spirit that seeks to be known not only by us, but in the world through us. It is through this Spirit that we are one with God. It is also through this Spirit that we are one with each other and with all of creation. God's Spirit dwelling within us. And one of the gifts of the human experience is that we have not forgotten that connection with God. That ultimately there is a spark or a fire or a glimmer of that oneness with God that dwells within us and seeks to be made known. As Paul reminds us, the more we connect with that Spirit that dwells within, the more we remember our intimate connection with God through that Spirit, the less we are limited by the false perceptions and fears of the human experience. The goal then is to continue to turn our attention, our awareness, our mind, our heart, and our practices toward the presence of that Spirit. The more we connect with that Spirit, the less we are imprisoned by the fears of the human condition. Now there's a temptation here. Some spiritual traditions would encourage us to reject the physical form, to reject the human experience, to condemn it as depraved, imperfect, ungodly. But that's not what Paul was trying to say. Instead, we are invited, like Jesus, to be fully divine and fully human. In other words, we are spiritual beings here to have a human experience. As such, we are invited to make peace with the human experience. We are invited to embrace the human experience and all that goes along with that. And the human experience is made up of so many things. It is made up of birth and growth and illness and joy, happiness and sorrow, physical disease and death. This is all part of the human experience, none of which are we invited to reject. Instead, we find that we discover peace, contentment, authentic freedom when we allow the Spirit that dwells within us to infuse and inform our human experience. Seeking love and peace and growth and learning in the perceived struggles of the human condition. To embrace all of it as divine. To embrace all of it as love. To embrace all of it as opportunities for growth and transformation and connection. So while we are here in flesh, living this human experience, we are also invited to embrace the fullness of what that experience means, to allow the Spirit within us to infuse and inform our human experience so that we might find joy and love and peace in being human. Spiritual beings having a human experience and experiencing all of it with relish and enthusiasm and joy. And that is my invitation for the coming week, that we be attentive to that opportunity to allow the Spirit of love within us to infuse our human experience so that both might give us a lived experience of authentic freedom. Thank you for your time and attention to this service. And again, if you found this to be meaningful or supportive to your own spiritual journey, I invite you to share this service with your friends in social networking, and I invite you to make a donation to Authentic Freedom Ministries. Again, thank you for your time and your attention, and have a happy 4th of July.